I want to start today's deep dive with a number that, if you saw it scrolling across a news ticker, you'd probably feel a little better about the world. 13%. According to the latest data we have for 2024, global terrorism deaths fell by 13%. It feels like, a victory lap might be in order, doesn't it?
It really does on the surface. And honestly, I hate to be the wet blanket right out of the gate, but we have to be so careful with that number.
Okay.
If you scratch just an inch below that headline, the story isn't that the world is getting safer. The story is that the threat is changing shape. It's not disappearing, it's metamorphosing.
That is the core theme of the research stack we're looking at today, metamorphosis. So
Okay.
walk me through this. Why is that 13% drop so misleading? Is the data wrong?
No, the data is accurate, but the context is, well, it's completely skewed. You have to remember that 2023 was a massive statistical outlier because of the October 7th Hamas attack. That single horrific event just spiked the global death toll. So what looks like a drop in 2024 is really just a statistical normalization. The data is just returning to the mean.
Okay.
If you take that one catastrophic day out of the charts, 2024 looks terrifyingly similar to 2023. The baseline violence hasn't really gone down.
So we aren't putting out the fire. The fire is just stabilizing at a high level.
Actually, it might be worse than stabilizing. While the total deaths dropped, technically, the footprint of terrorism expanded.
How so?
The number of countries that experience terrorism actually rose from 58 to 66. So, to keep with your analogy, the fire isn't going out, it's spreading to more rooms in the house.
And that brings us right to the mission for this deep dive. We need to figure out where this fire is moving. Because reading through these reports, my mental map of terrorism, which I think for a lot of us is stuck somewhere between, Baghdad and Kabul circa 2010.
Oh, absolutely.
It feels completely outdated.
It is. And that's the danger. If you are still looking at the Middle East as the epicenter of global terrorism, you're looking at the wrong map.
So where should we be looking?
The center of gravity has shifted. Decisively. We aren't talking about the Levant anymore. We're talking about the Sahel region of sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay, a quick geography check for everyone listening. The Sahel is that semi-arid belt just south of the Sahara. We're talking Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger.
That's the area.
How big of a shift are we really talking about here?
It's explosive. I mean, it's one of the most rapid shifts in conflict geography we've ever seen. Let's just look at the timeline. In 2007, the Sahel accounted for just 1% of global terrorism deaths.
1%?
Just 1%. It was barely a footnote. Fast forward to the 2024 data. The Sahel now accounts for 51% of all global terrorism deaths.
From 1% to 51, that's not a trend. That's a total relocation of the problem.
Exactly. The epicenter has physically moved, and the intensity within that new epicenter is just staggering. Burkina Faso has been ranked the #1 most impacted country on Earth for the second year in a row.
Wow.
Think about that. 1 out of every 5 people killed by terrorism on this entire planet is killed in Burkina Faso.
That is a heartbreaking statistic. And it's intensifying in the neighboring countries too, right?
It is. Right next door, Niger saw the largest global increase in deaths in 2024, a surge of 94% to over 900 fatalities in a single year. The violence is just concentrating in the specific cluster of borders.
It really puts things in perspective when you look at the so-called success stories in the data, just to see how much the map has flipped. I notice Iraq, which used to be synonymous with this kind of violence,
Completely off the radar.
it's basically dropped off.
Iraq is now outside the top 10 entirely. Deaths there are down 99% since 2007. Now, that proves counter-terrorism can work. Stability is possible. But it also highlights what we call the balloon effect. You squeeze one area, put massive pressure on the Middle East, and the air just rushes somewhere else. The pressure finds a new weak point.
And the worry right now, based on these sources, is that the Sahel balloon is starting to leak. It's not staying contained in the desert.
That's the spillover effect.
Yeah.
For a while, policymakers hoped this would stay in those landlocked, remote areas, but now we're seeing violence bleeding down from the center toward the coastal states of West Africa. Togo, for instance, just recorded its worst year ever for terrorism.
So these are countries with ports, with different economies, and the threat is literally knocking on their door.
It is.
So we know where it's happening. Let's talk about who is doing it. If I stop someone on the street, ask them to name a terror group, they're almost certainly going to say ISIS or Al-Qaeda.
Right.
Are they still the main players?
Globally, yes. The Islamic State and its affiliates are still the deadliest network. They haven't gone away. But in this new epicenter, in the Sahel, there is a specific player that is rapidly rising, and frankly, they are incredibly dangerous. They're known as JNI.
I see that acronym all over these reports. JNIM. It sounds like a tech startup, but obviously it's not.
It stands for Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin. They're technically an al-Qaeda affiliate.
Yeah.
And while ISIS gets the global headlines for their branding, their videos, JNIM has quietly become the dominant force in this region.
How dumb.
Deaths attributed to them rose 46% in 2024. But the statistic that really jumps out at analysts, the one that keeps intelligence officers up at night, it isn't the total count, it's the efficiency.
Efficiency is a chilling word to use for this.
It is, but it's the only way to describe it. We look at the lethality rate, basically how many people die per attack. In 2024, JNIM attacks averaged 9.8 deaths per incident.
Nearly 10 people per attack. That implies these aren't just hit-and-run skirmishes, these are mass casualty events.
Precisely. It implies a level of tactical control, coordination, and ruthlessness that is escalating. They aren't just taking potshots, they are wiping out entire villages or military outposts.
And it gets worse, right? Because I read that we suspect these numbers are actually conservative.
They are. And that's the known unknown here. In the Sahel, attacks happen in such remote areas. There's no government presence to count the bodies, no journalists, and the groups don't always claim responsibility.
Because there's a data void.
A huge one. The Institute for Economics and Peace used machine learning models to analyze thousands of these unclaimed attacks to see if they fit the pattern of JM or ISIS. Looking at the geography, the weapons, the targets.
So they used AI to fill in the blanks?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the models suggest that the real death toll from JNM could actually be 176% higher than the official count.
Wow. So the official data, which is already awful, is just the tip of the iceberg. This brings me to logistics. We are talking about one of the poorest regions on Earth. How does a group like JNIM sustain operations at this scale? Armies cost money.
That's the pivotal question. And the answer isn't some deep-pocketed donor in a penthouse somewhere. It's local. We call it the crime-terror nexus.
The crime-terror nexus.
These groups have essentially morphed into, diversified business enterprises. They aren't just ideologues reading scripture. They are managing a portfolio of illicit economies.
So what are the revenue streams? What are they selling?
The biggest one is artisanal gold mining. This is huge in the Sahel. You have to picture it. Thousands of small, unregulated mines. JNIM moves in, secures the territory, and then taxes the miners. It's a protection racket on a massive scale.
And that gives them steady cash flow.
Steady revenue and, more importantly, territorial control. They become the de facto government in those areas.
And kidnapping is in that portfolio as well.
It's a booming industry. Kidnapping for ransom incidents surged from just 78 in 2017 to over 1,000 in 2023. It's quick cash.
Yeah.
Then you add in trafficking drugs, cattle rustling. They've diversified their income so they aren't reliant on just one source.
Which connects back to something that always fascinates me, motivation. Why does a young man in Burkina Faso or Mali join these groups? We tend to think of it as brainwashing.
And that's part of it, but
if it's a business, are they joining for the job?
for many, yes.
Yeah.
You have to strip away our assumptions. Look at the economics. Unemployment in some of these areas is over 40%. You have young men with absolutely no prospects.
Right.
When a group like J&I comes to town and offers a salary that's more than you could ever make legally, plus a motorcycle, plus protection for your family, that is a powerful recruiting tool. It's not just about jihad. It's about survival. It's a job offer.
It's a rational economic choice in a completely irrational situation.
Exactly.
So it feels like we're looking at a perfect storm here. You have the money from crime, the foot soldiers from poverty. What are the other structural issues driving this explosion right now?
It is a convergence of 4 distinct crises hitting all at once. We've talked about the economic. The second is ecological. Climate change acts as a threat multiplier.
We hear that phrase a lot, threat multiplier. What does it actually mean on the ground?
It means resources are shrinking, which forces people into conflict. 58% of the people facing food insecurity live in the countries most affected by terrorism. When land dries up, herders and farmers fight over water. These are ancient tensions, but now they're desperate.
And the terror groups exploit that.
They step in and say, we'll protect your water access if you support us. They weaponize the climate crisis. Then add the third driver, political vacuums.
The coup.
The wave of coup in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. These juntas took over promising security, but then they kicked out Western forces, the French, the UN. That created huge security gaps.
And into that vacuum stepped Russia and the Africa Corps, what used to be Wagner.
Right, and the data shows this has often made the violence worse, not better. And the fourth driver,
Let me guess, technology.
technology. It's the accelerant. We're seeing digital radicalization happening in weeks, not months. And physically, we're seeing the weaponization of commercial drones. You can buy a drone off the shelf, strap an explosive to it, and suddenly a ragtag militia has a precision airstrike capability.
It's terrifyingly accessible. I want to pivot for a second because I know we have listeners in places that feel very far away from the Sahel. What does this metamorphosis mean for the West? Are we safer because the focus has shifted?
Yes and no. If you look at the sheer volume of attacks, the West is relatively safe. They ticked up slightly in 2024 to 52 attacks, but compared to the thousands in the Sahel, the numbers are small. But the profile of the threat in the West has completely changed. It's metamorphosed. We aren't seeing complex, coordinated plots anymore. We are in the era of the lone actor.
93% of fatal attacks in West are by lone actors.
Exactly. Which makes them incredibly hard to stop. There's no conspiracy to unravel if there's only one person involved. And the demographic is shifting too. We're seeing a disturbing trend of teenage involvement.
How much?
Nearly two-thirds of ISIS-linked arrests in Europe in 2024 involved teenagers.
2/3? That's massive. Why teenagers?
Because the radicalization is happening online, often in gaming spaces. It's gamified. And the motivation is shifting from political, like far-right extremism, back toward religious motivation, which the data shows tends to be more lethal.
So if the threat is a single person, often young, self-radicalizing online, how do you even catch them? The old tools seem like they wouldn't work.
You need a different mental model. The field is moving from risk assessment, which is about probability, to threat assessment, which is about behavior. There's a tool mentioned in the research called TRA-18, and it uses a great weather report analogy.
Okay, I love a good analogy. Break it down.
Think of distal characteristics. These are things like personal grievances, identifying with an ideology. These are the storm clouds on the horizon. They tell you a storm is possible, but not that it's raining.
You can't arrest everyone who has a grievance.
You'd arrest half the population. You monitor the clouds, but you don't panic. The rain, though, those are proximal warning behaviors. This is the storm in your backyard. This is when the individual moves from thinking to doing.
Like buying weapons.
Buying weapons, doing reconnaissance or leakage, telling someone their plan. When you see the storm in the backyard, you have to act immediately. The challenge is distinguishing the clouds from the rain before it's too late.
That is a really helpful way to visualize it. It's about behavior, not identity. I want to zoom back out before we wrap up. What about the when? Is there any science that predicts when this wave of violence might crest?
There is some fascinating modeling on this, and it comes from economics. A theory called the Kuznets cycle. It tracks long-term economic swings, about 18 to 22 years. Research has found that terrorism follows these same cycles almost perfectly.
Why would terrorism track with the economy so closely?
It makes sense if you think about the drivers. Terrorism spikes during the B phase, the economic downturn. When you have depression, high inequality, weak institutions, you create the conditions for violence. It's that desperate job offer again. And the model suggests we are deep in a B phase right now.
So what's the forecast for the next few years?
The forecast is concerning. The models predict a peak in war and high-impact terrorism right around 2025. We're likely in a high-risk decade that lasts until about 2030.
So we shouldn't expect this to just vanish next year.
No. Another model, the ARIMA model, suggests we're going to see stabilization, but at a high plateau. A new normal of around 4,200 incidents a year globally, rather than a sharp decline.
Sobering. Okay, let's pull these threads together. We started with the idea that terror deaths are down, but that's an illusion. The epicenter has moved to the Sahel, driven by JNIM, funded by crime, fueled by climate change and political chaos.
And while the West sees fewer attacks, the lone actor threat is becoming harder to detect. You have to start seeing it as a systemic issue tied to economics and governance.
There's one final thing, a paradox you mentioned. Western governments are pivoting to great power competition, worrying about Russia and China. How does that connect?
It's the strategic paradox of our time. The West pulls back from counter-terrorism to focus on state rivals. But when we pull back from places like the Sahel, we create the very vacuums that Russia and China rush to fill.
So ignoring these terror hotspots actually helps our rivals.
Exactly. You can't separate the two. If you ignore the Sahel, you lose ground to Russia. It's all the same chessboard.
It's all connected. Before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought you brought up about definitions. We rely on this data, the Global Terrorism Index, but there's a massive catch, isn't there?
There is. The index only counts violence by non-state actors.
Which means?
It means when the Taliban was an insurgency, their violence was counted as terrorism. But the moment they took over Afghanistan and became the government, that violence is now state repression. It disappears from the terrorism statistics overnight.
So the violence could stay exactly the same or get worse, but because the label changed, the chart goes down.
Exactly. It raised the uncomfortable question. If we just define the problem out of existence, have we really solved anything? Or are we just hiding the reality behind a new label?
Something to chew on. That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.